Hey guys, so I got Johnny down here today.
Hey, how's it going, Dane?
It's going really good.
Awesome.
So you brought us a really cool guitar to look at.
I did indeed,
It's
Dane.
show and tell time.
Yeah, absolutely. Dane, I gotta tell you, man, I've been buying and selling guitars just kind of as a side hobby now for about 20 years.
Right?
I've owned some guitars, as you know, owned by rock stars like Billy Joe Armstrong at Green Day.
That's right.
I've owned, other guitars that have been graced the hands of rock stars, but nothing ever quite like this.
Wow,
And
okay.
even though this is not owned by a rock star, it's about as close as you can get to rock royalty, and I'm going to explain now.
Okay.
So this is a 1962 Rickenbacker 425. And what makes this guitar absolutely extraordinary is that it is 5 serial numbers away. When it left the factory in September of 1962, it's 5 serial numbers away from a guitar that was bought by a 20-year-old tourist in September of 1963 by the name of George Harrison. When he came to Illinois to visit his sister, Louise, he bought it from a shop in Mount Vernon, Illinois, where he was staying in Benton with his sister, Louise. He was able to kind of meet some local musicians and everything. So let me back up for a second, because there's so much history here, and I hope you'll just allow me to kind of chat a little bit about it.
Yeah, let's hear the story on this guitar.
So go back in time with me for a moment then to 1963, September. And at that time in the UK, Beatlemania was getting into full form, right? I mean, the guys couldn't really go out of their houses. John, Paul, George, and Ringo were really becoming stars at that point. They were stars, but they were on the cusp of superstardom. They weren't full-fledged rock stars just yet. I mean, this was the early 60s. Kennedy was still alive. The Beatles were really, they'd done their time in Hamburg. They gelled as a band. Ringo had joined the band about a year prior in August of 62. And now here we are in September of 63. The Beatles have had a relentless touring schedule, recording schedule. They've had a few hits in the UK. I think by now they've had 3 or 4 number ones in the UK.
Yeah, Please
Me,
yeah.
Right, was out. That full album that was out. They had several singles. And by September, the guys were like, you know what, let's take a break. So I think it was the latter half of September of 63, John Lennon and his wife Cynthia went to Paris for a little vacation. Ringo and Paul decided to go to Greece together just to kind of hang out, and then George decided to fly to the United States with his brother Peter and visit his sister Louise. And when I was 16, I'm a Beatle nut.
Right.
I just turned 40, and when I was
Right.
16 years old, I met George's older sister Louise at a Beatle convention in Chicago, not far from where all this took place in the Benton, Mount Vernon, Illinois area. Anyway, so George comes over for 2 weeks. He goes camping with Louise and her family. He does some sightseeing in New York. But then he also joins a band, kind of unofficially called the Four Vests. And they were the biggest band in the Mount Vernon, Illinois area at the time that his sister Louise hooked George up with. Yeah, Mount Vernon, Illinois, right? I mean, and so one of those guys in the band, the Four Vests, took George to a music store. I believe it was called Fenton's Music, in the downtown area of Mount Vernon, Illinois. And so George walks into a store there, and he's like, "I'd like a Rickenbacker, please," because they weren't available in the UK.
Right.
In early 60 or late 63, you couldn't
Right.
find them. So George
Right.
had it in his mind that I'm going to get a Rickenbacker to look just like John. So John's playing a 325 that he had painted black, and the guys, by this point, they'd really gelled. I mean, the Fab Four were in full effect. Ringo, like I said, had been in for a year. He wanted aesthetically, he wanted to look kind of match John, right, with a Rickenbacker that looked like his. So he went into this store in Mount Vernon, and this is what he found. And George's serial number on it was BH439, which the letter B represented the year 1962, right? So you can see that. The letter I signifies the month of the year. So in this case, this was September.
So let me get in real close.
Get in real close in here, because
where's the
this
serial
is
number at?
So it's right here on the bridge. So it's BI, and then on the other side you see 444 on this guitar. So what that signifies, this is the 444th guitar Rickenbacker made in the year 1962, okay, which was September. Now George's came out in August of 62. His serial number was B and then H. B was the year, right, 1962. H was the month, which was August, and then his was the 439th guitar that Rickenbacker made in the year 1962. So this guitar was 5 guitars away from the one that George made, and most likely one of the only other 425s in that batch. You know, I mean, it was not the most common model of Rickenbacker. It was more of an entry mid-level point. It does have Brazilian
Was George's
rosewood.
all the same color?
George was the same color, and I'm glad you asked about that because George's looked exactly like this. I mean, it had this beautiful fire glow finish, and the owner of Fenton's music,
Fire glow.
Fire glow is what it's called. But George again wanted a Rickenbacker to match John's, so he asked the shop, and Mr. Fenton that owned the store. Always went out of his way to please his customers, and so he said, "Will you paint it black for me?" So he had this beautiful fire glow finish, which his Rickenbacker later, the hollow one that in Hard Day's Night, that was fire glow. He didn't mess with the color on that, but for whatever reason, at this moment in time, he said, "You know, I just want you to paint it black so it matches the guitar that's in my band with John Lennon." So they did. So they painted it black. So George never performed live with it, but when he first came across this guitar, it looked exactly like this, and the case exactly like this. And that he would have then carried back on his own when he flew back to the UK. So he bought this.
I can see where the neck is one solid piece of wood right
Yeah.
through here, and then it looks like it's got the wings glued on each side there.
That's correct. Yeah.
What
that's
is
how
the
they did
wood
so.
that they used on this thing?
Gosh, I think it was probably a form of maple. I want to say. But I'd have to probably double check that.
Right.
You know, so shame on me for not knowing. You've got the. You know, you think of the R tailpiece in a lot of these guys. Unfortunately, this one does not have that. I'm not exactly sure of what this bridge
Right.
tremolo was called,
Right.
but it does have, of course, as we all can see, the toaster pickup. That's original.
So
It's
this
great.
model has, with the single pickup,
yeah.
what was the model again of this
It's
thing?
right. It's a 425.
425, and so
right.
there was a
450, I think, that had the two pickups. And,
I gotcha.
And George's guitar, as it stands today, so it went through some changes. Fortunately or unfortunately, obviously the black paint is on it. It has the two pickups. If you look at pictures of it now, it was in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame
Right.
for several years, and I think eventually it was sold to a private collector for about $600,000.
Is this
So-
original pick guard and original
Yeah.
knobs and
To
everything?
the best of my knowledge, this thing is 100% stock. This guitar, again, as it stands today, looks exactly like the way George Harrison found it in 1963 in Illinois. But like I said, he played it for a half hour in the shop, he fell in love with it, and he gave it to Mr. Fenton, and he said, "Mr. Fenton, paint it black for me." So he did. He came
So
back.
there's a chance,
and,
not to
yeah.
cut you off, but
Yeah.
this guitar could have been in that very same shop.
It easily could have been in that same shop. Yeah, it was happenstance that, again, this is the 444th guitar Rickenbacker made in the year 1962, and his guitar, being the exact same model, the same finish, the same everything, was made, it was the 439th guitar made that year. So again, you're 5 serial numbers off. So it was made, both guitars were made in 62. George didn't come to the US until for another year. So these probably sat around, and as did his, in a music shop somewhere for a long time before someone bought it. Because a Rickenbacker, a lot of guys were looking for
It's
Fenders.
expensive.
Very expensive. And a lot of guys were Fenders and Gibsons. I mean, were in their heyday at that time. And beyond, but Rickenbacker maybe wasn't the first guitar of choice for the professional musician per se. But
Yeah,
George
and
had it in his head. I was going to.
A lot of guys could only afford like a Silvertone or a
Right.
K or something
Exactly.
like that.
Yeah, but he was like, I'm going to get a Rick because by this point the Beatles had made some money, being stars in their homeland, and but again they hadn't quite hit that superstar status. That didn't happen until February of '64. When they came and were on the Ed Sullivan Show, as we all know.
Right.
Now, you can see George using this guitar in its black format with the one toaster pickup on a couple of different shows in October, November of '63. One being Thank Your Lucky Stars, and another being, I think, Ready, Steady, Go. One of them was co-starring Dusty Springfield. So if you Google, or YouTube, Beatles, Dusty Springfield, 1963, you'll see a video of George playing this guitar in its black form. Without any other modifications to it. Now,
And he left the pickguard white?
Yes, yeah, the pickguard, everything in the headstock, swoosh, everything was the same, but everything was painted black other than that. By the end of '63, beginning of '64, he didn't really use it a whole lot. He used it on stage for those performances, but there's a lot of evidence as well that he played it on I Want to Hold Your Hand. When they recorded it, because as soon as he got
In
back
the studio.
in the studio,
I gotcha.
When you listen to "I Want to Hold Your Hand" and some of the lead parts, more than likely it wasn't on the Gretsch Country Gentleman, as we know, or the Duo Jet. It was on this Rickenbacker 425 with the one pickup.
So you would get that real twangy tone out of it, huh?
Yeah. Value-wise, again, the original one, it was upgraded. They put a second pickup in it after George had it. After the very beginning of '64, there's no evidence that he ever touched it again. He gave it to another gentleman in a different band, and then again, it ended up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as it sits today with the 2 pickups, which a lot of people say they didn't do a very good job with the mods. But anyway, from there, it ended up in a private collection for about $600,000. This particular guitar, I would say, because of the serial number, I would say it's a $3,000 to $4,000 guitar all day long. A lot of people would probably disagree with me. But I think because of the provenance with it, and because it's so close in serial to the one George Harrison personally owned and used on stage with the Beatles and used in the studio recording "I Want to Hold Your Hand," which again was the match that lit the dynamite for the British invasion. Really, I mean, when you think about it, John and Paul were asked by Brian Epstein to write, who was their manager, asked them to write a song that would appeal to the American audience. So in October of '63, right after George's vacation and he got this guitar, they went in and they recorded "I Want to Hold Your Hand." And then it got released in the US, and that was the first #1 they had in the United States. And then everything else, Beatlemania ensued nationwide, and they became superstars. But this trip, I mean, this guitar again signifies that last point in George's life where he could be anonymous and just go around and go do regular things, go into a store and buy a guitar. He couldn't do that, after this trip, really, because the band got too famous, and it would be years before he could ever go out in public, maybe with a disguise or whatever, and just try to be incognito. So again, I think for a 58-year-old girl, she'll be 58.
She's a beauty.
In September, I think she's looking just stunning. And I love how these older Rickenbackers, if you look at the late 50s, early 60s, this may have been in the sunlight, I'm not sure. I mean, it seems almost like an orange than it does the red.
Right.
And I love that. I think the orange kind of glow to it is really unique, and I wish Rickenbacker would do that again.
Sounds just like the Beatles.
I know,
That's
right?
awesome
It's
sounding.
exactly. They could have just recorded that. Yeah.
Great sounding little guitar.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And anyway, George, thank you for everything you did. And like I said earlier, I'd be honored to have this given to Olivia, Danny, or whomever is a big Beatle fan.
Maybe someday they'll see that.
Maybe one day I'll sell it, maybe I won't, who knows, but this is by far one of the coolest guitars I've ever come across. So thank you everyone for watching.